see. Hi, everybody. It's so nice to be with you, and I hear you've had a great and intense time here. I didn't know about the cruise and the shots, though, until Marty just said that. But I arrived today, and I'm delighted to be here, and I'm a little bummed that I have to leave tomorrow because today was so lovely and perfect. I know that we here are all communicators, and communication is really challenging in this day and age, as you well know. And I think the biggest reason is just there are so many distractions. It's so hard to get people's attention. And so what I want to talk to you tonight about is how visual tools can help you with that goal. Because something that I've known for a really long time about National Geographic that you guys might not realize is that we have learned how to use compelling photography to trick people into learning something. So our job as photographers is to go out there and to produce images that are so interesting that we trick people into reading the caption. And then Geographic had a special group of writers who wrote captions that were so compelling that we could actually trick people into reading the stories and learning, because our mission was to educate and to explore. So I'm going to draw from my privileged life, and it really has been an unbelievable privilege to do the work that I've done for many years and try to help you see what I have found in that journey, what I have learned mostly from the people who I photograph about communication. So first I'm going to tell you a little story about the very first time I left the United States. At this point I've worked in 150 countries, but when I started out at National Geographic, I'd only paddled into Canada from Minnesota. And back then, believe it or not, you didn't even have to have a passport to go. I mean, it was amazing. I'm very old. Anyway, but the first place I was sent was Namibia in Southwest Africa. So it was really like jumping in big time. And it was an extraordinary, and remains an extraordinary country. This was back when apartheid was full on, and there were nomadic tribes that were extremely remote. And we went looking for one, the Ovahimba tribe, very remote and further isolated by 7 years of drought. So we had to get a special vehicle and go up the Skeleton Coast and inland. It took several days, and then finally we found some people. And the first people that I saw were 3 women and 2 kids, and they were down in a ravine in the desert. And back in those days, the only instant pictures were Polaroids. So I pulled out as I walked toward them, and I'm grinning, I pull out the Polaroid camera, and they're looking at me as though I've just arrived by spaceship. And as I got closer, I pulled up the Polaroid and took their picture. They had no idea what I was doing. And then I handed them the little square, and as the picture came up on the Polaroid, the 3 women fell on the ground and started rolling around and laughing and pointing to each other. And without a word of shared language, I knew they were going, "That's you." "No, yeah, that's you." "No." And in an instant, I realized none of these women had ever seen her own face before. And so they were literally showing each other, their girlfriends or sisters, "That's you, that's your face." And it was incredibly humbling for me, as a 25-year-old kid. I was also the very youngest photographer at Geographic, which was pretty intimidating. But to see that and to spend the next 36 hours with these women, it literally changed my life. So let me start there. I don't know if we can bring these lights down a little bit. I told the guys earlier today, I'm at a point in my life where I look best backlit by candlelight. But that was me at 25. And you can see why these guys were a little freaked by me. I've got these gigantic things on my face, and my Minnesota Zoo t-shirt and my ball cap. But here's what I love about this picture. Doesn't it look like two girlfriends just chatting? And that is how it felt. What a mind-boggling thing for a 25-year-old young woman from the States to have this experience and to realize that without a single syllable of shared language, you could communicate. In fact, you could communicate better. Because if you were willing to make an idiot out of yourself pantomiming, and I certainly was, you could say to anyone, you know, oh, love your necklace, or, your kids are beautiful, the tea is good. You could laugh together. You could find that common thread of humanity. And they understood it too. They would hold a breast up and point to their mouth. And I knew instantly they were asking, did I have some sort of magic medicine or potion that would make their milk come in? Because literally after 7 years of drought, they were very concerned about their kids getting enough to eat. This is where they lived. I believe it's the most beautiful, I've been to a lot of places, and this is the most beautiful desert I've ever seen. The Namib and then the Okavango area. And yet, how would you like to find lunch for yourself and your kids every day? And yet they did. They were survivors. They were not victims. They were extraordinary women who knew how to find moisture and roots and vegetation where none of us would ever have been able to find it. And so my admiration and my, first thinking I'm visiting poor people and then realizing who can survive when I cannot, really changed my notion of people in much more challenging circumstances than we live in. They lived right with the wildlife. And this also helped me in my journey of understanding that we're just another animal. I think it's so hard for humans to remember that we too are animals and that we have biological imperatives apart from getting laid. I know that's one everyone's aware of. But there's a lot of stuff, that is a biological imperative. And I learned that from this, that, that these people were other animals' food and vice versa, that basic. And so there was an amazing respect when they made a kill. And nothing, I don't think they have the word for waste in their language because every cell of an animal was key to their survival. This is my mom. My mom has been the greatest inspiration of my life. And she's a Irish, Catholic, suburban Minnesota nice girl. She's so nice. And what my mom taught me was that, beneath that niceness, she had an understanding of how to go around a problem. So for example, my favorite example about this in Mom is that when she was born the day Charles Lindbergh flew the Atlantic. May 20th, 1927, Mom was born. And she was told that when she was a kid, and he was a big Minnesota hero, so she had this fascination with flight. And when she finished high school, she went, this was back in the good old Pan Am days, and she went to become a flight attendant. And when she arrived, she was told, oop, need not apply, because girls who wear glasses, it's really a safety consideration. Because imagine in turbulence, they could go flying off. And so rather than push back and fight that reality in her life, she became a pilot. And, that's the woman that raised me to not accept, not bam into a problem, but just say, okay, and then find a way around the problem. This is a picture I took the day I became a photographer. This is the day I said, this is for me. And I was always going to be a writer. And I took my junior year of college, I took a class to learn how to use a camera because I thought it might be a good skill to have. And 2 weeks later, I found myself on a golf course in St. Paul, Minnesota, laying on my belly the assignment was light, and it was fall, and it was cold, and the sun was coming up, and it was coming through this tree, and it was fracturing the light. It was so beautiful. And I was laying on my belly shooting this picture, and I didn't realize that I was laying on the sprinkler system, but I was. And so it went off, but I remember standing up, and I was cold and wet and muddy and ecstatically happy. And I literally caught a bus back to the campus and changed my major and never looked back. So my first work was in, my backyard. It was in the farmlands of Minnesota, and we didn't have assignments. You were supposed to know what people cared about and fill that paper. And I worked at a wonderful little paper. So this is a high school parking lot. Somebody was late for class. And what I learned is that there are pictures everywhere. This was actually an assignment, a really exciting one. They wanted me to photograph the exercise class at the retirement home. And going into that with a sense of humor and a sense of trying to reveal who people are was just so much fun for me. And it was remarkably an easy transition to National Geographic. Because when we go out there, they don't know if we get up in the morning, but they expect us to come back with authenticity, with real stories, at a level that our colleagues set for each other. And so I had this deep affection for my own culture, and I had so much fun photographing my own culture. This is the high school graduation class of a school in North Dakota. And the affection I learned in my own backyard and at that little newspaper has allowed me to understand how to humanize every other culture I've been privileged to work in, and how to try to make people understand through some kind of emotional response. And that's really when I feel like I've done my job, is if the people who look at my pictures have an emotional response and then want to know more. And pictures can do that so beautifully. This is a Norwegian farmer. He was 86 years old when this picture was taken. It was 60 below zero in San Diego. No, it was in North Dakota. And and to me, this just showed his devotion. It was such a serious blizzard. He had moved all his livestock in the barn, and he was going out to check on them. And his name was Helge Holti. And Helge died before we published our story, and the writer was talking to some of his neighbors about him. And one of his neighbors said, well, let me put it this way. In my next life, I wouldn't mind coming back as one of Helge's cows. And that's what we published, and it's like his wife was so happy, and it was just such an understanding of the character of this culture. I also learned, I worked with a wildlife photographer, and I really learned to understand that if you want to photograph animals, you have to remember that you're a guest in their space, and you have to abide by their way of doing things, or they flee. And that's something that has been so helpful to me as I've worked with the human animal, is to understand any culture, I park my expectations, I park my American values, I park a lot of stuff when I get off that plane, and I remember that I'm a guest in their culture, and I try to understand who they are and why they do things, just as I would with any animal. And that's been a huge help to me, and I learned that, on the prairies of Minnesota. So tying those things together really formed the whole journey that I took. And, I'm going to show you a few pictures here and just pretend it's a Rorschach test or something. Just tell me, what emotion do you feel immediately? And you can yell it out or you can just feel it, whatever you want. But what do you feel? I mean, you got to admit that my friend Hamoudi in the middle looks like central casting for a terrorist, doesn't, But this is who he really is, and that's my child that he has rescued from a sandstorm And you look at the look on Charlie's face, and it tells you who Moody really is. Someone he trusts utterly. And it's a much more revealing photograph about the Arab culture that I know so well, and that has been so miscast by people who live by fear. What do you feel? Don't you remember when you were a kid? What's the Taj Mahal? South Dakota. You know, getting energy and movement in a still image is a wonderful challenge, but it can be done, and you can communicate power and force and thrill. Or the opposite, again, a moving image, but it's about spirituality and meditation. Just wind. Just grasses in the wind. Just sex. You know, the tango is just the sexiest dance, and and it's so much fun to photograph because, you know, if you just let the bodies tell you what to take pictures of, boy, do they do it. See, you're feeling something. I can hear it. I can hear it. You know, this is a gaucho in Argentina. This is in Prague, and this is just these crazy power bockers. And a lot of these things, what you'll see is the communication tool is to understand how to approach each of these situations. What is going to bring back that feeling? So in this picture, for example, it's my angle. The fact that I'm laying on my back in this square where these crazy guys are jumping around gives you a really big sense of how high they're going and what's happening. So somebody who understands photography is constantly making choices about how to shoot each of these things, how to give that, how to bring that message home. And we also know when to abandon ship and try something else. That's another really important thing. So I was literally in a park in Vancouver where all the brides go to be photographed, and I was with a lovely bride and her bridal party, and it was okay. It was not, it was good. It was okay. But then I looked across the park, and I saw these guys coming, and they were just so in love and so happy that I ditched my bride and went trucking across the park, and shot this picture, and then they were so in love and having so much fun that they fell down. And so a lot of it, too, is trusting your gut and trying to remember, what is the message here? What am I trying to say? And I went back, and I was very nice to my bride, and I sent her pictures and everything. But this was the feeling I was going for. Another thing that's so important that I think is part of the human curiosity and the human spirit, people want to see behind the scenes. They really want an insight into the stuff they don't usually get to see. And so, for example, and I think what we have to do is just not be so darn literal all the time. This guy was a famous fell runner in northern England. And so I spent a big chunk of the day with him training while he's running, up and down, running. And it was okay. But at the end of the day, he's a farmer. And so he said, well, I got to get back to work here. And I said, well, can I just hang around? And he went into the barn and started shearing sheep. And to me, it said much more about his connection to the land and his physical energy than the running pictures did all day. So a lot of times when we're going to illustrate something, it's really good to not be so darn literal. Don't photograph the runway at the fashion show. Go behind the scenes while these, this is in Lebanon, in Beirut, which has a fabulous fashion industry. but I was back with the girls, and then you get a real sense of them kind of revving up. You can tell she is getting ready to walk, and you see the intensity that she brings to her reality in life. Watching the transformation of just a pretty little Chinese face as she becomes a Chinese opera star is much more interesting than seeing her on stage. So it's that back door, that inside view, that behind the scenes that I think so often is what really makes people want to see more, want to know more. This is an example. I was shooting dragon boat racing, and I was so impressed that they got up at like 4 in the morning, even on the worst days, and they were out there paddling. And so I met them and talked to them and told them how little I could scrunch into the front of the boat to take pictures. And then the next like 4 days in a row, it was sunny and bright and lovely. And I said, no, I want to go with you the way I first saw you. I want to go with you when the weather is crappy, when it's really a rotten day and you're still out there and you're still giving it your all. And so that to me would show their commitment to their sport much more than a pretty day on the river. When I go places, when I've got to shoot something, I ask a million questions, and I think so often we forget that. We kind of just accept what's easy to grab. So one of the things I had to photograph was the Port of Vancouver. And so my questions were, what's the worst job in the port? What's the, who would want? And they told me the guys who have to jump into the holds of the ship and shovel the grain into all the corners was the worst job because they can hardly breathe. And so that's what I shot. And again, it's that just have fun and be curious, read everything. This is the Calder Valley Mouse Club. And I kind of have a thing for British men anyway, but these guys were the best. And nope, I'm not going to know about this by going online. I was literally in a cafe in northern England, and I was reading the bulletin board, because I always read the bulletin board, because that's where real people put stuff. And there was a little recipe card that said, there will be a meeting of the Calder Valley Mouse Club Wednesday at 10. So I went. And sure enough, this is so British. They grow mice and compete. They have a competition to see who has the best mouse. And guess what, boys and girls? You are looking at a champ. This is Mr. Wormold, and look at the length of that tail. And he also assured me that the position of the spots was quite unique. Also British men. Other times it just happens to you. You're covering something, and you're paying attention, and then you see it all come together. So this was in Sydney Harbor. These guys had been out on their boats all day in their tutus and their singlets because they dressed their boat up as Swan Lake. Well, as the day wore on and the lager flowed, their inner ballerina came out. And I looked and, oh my God, they're crossing their ankles and curling their toes. And, you just can't make that stuff up. Sometimes it's right there for you. Sometimes it's really hard work. And sometimes it's right there for you. But there's so much magic out there that we can use to help people pause. And that's really what photography, I think, does, what visuals do, is in this stream of information and charts and graphs and statistics and facts, a photograph can make you pause. And a lot of times that's what we're all after. We're trying to get somebody's attention. And that's certainly what I'm after with my work. This is on top of Victoria Falls on a day where I thought I was going to blow my assignment because I arrived and the falls was running very, very slow, which is unbelievable. I don't know if you've seen Vic Falls, but it creates its own weather. It's just like, and I arrived, and for some reason, it was the lowest the Zambezi had been in a long time. And I was trying to figure out what to do, and I was talking to the locals, and they told me, well, yeah, every once in a while it gets this slow, but that's the only time we can swim. And I said, you can what? And they said, oh, yeah, there's a swimming hole there up at the top of the falls, and you can get there, you can swim out to this little swimming hole, which is in front of him, because the crocodiles and the hippos won't go that close to the edge, so they won't eat you en route. And then when you get there, and so it was really crazy pictures. We were there for a couple hours, really kind of crazy pictures until the very end when it was time to leave, because it was getting dark. And I turned to go, and I turned around, and this lovely man who lives there, this is his home, was just having a private moment on top of the falls, and it became my favorite picture from the day. And a lot of times that's what it takes too, is we just stay with it until something comes together and takes our breath away. And then there are these kind of moments. So it's, being ready is a huge part of it, just being ready for whatever happens there in front of you and investing the time and what I call earning it. You gotta earn this stuff. And the best way to earn it is to spend time, to slow yourself down and really spend time with your creativity, doing something extraordinary. Now, I don't know how many of you guys have been on at a real family branding, but it's one of our culture's biggies. And I was invited to this ranch in the middle of nowhere, and it was so far from any town or anything that they invited me to stay at the ranch house, so I wouldn't have to drive from a motel far away, and so it was very nice. And the next morning I woke up, and there was this gorgeous light streaming through my door, and I looked out, and there was this mackerel sky, and the horses were in the pasture, and it was like all coming together, and the sun was about to come up, and so I grabbed my camera, and I ran down to the fence, and then this horse came right up to me, and the sky was perfect, and the sun rose, and the horses were, and I was just like, ah! And when I finished shooting, I remember I just went, whoop, like this, and then I turned around, and that's when I saw like 4 or 5 cowboys leaning up against a fence looking at the crazy lady from National Geographic. And at that point, I realized I was in a t-shirt and underwear because I literally grabbed my camera and ran. And I tell you this story just because my wish for every creative person on earth is to have days like this, where you are so passionate and so caught up in something that you care about that you forget to put your pants on. I think I'm a champion of this. So then these are just pictures from the rest of the day, but needless to say, they weren't very intimidated by me, and this is how I shoot most days, where I try to shoot a little story on a subject. Even if only one picture will be used for the magazine, I want to tell the story of these people. And this is the, what do you call it, chuck wagon driver. And these events are just like multi-generational. Everybody comes, everybody eats. It's silly, but it's hard work, and it's bigger than Christmas on a ranch. This little guy came up to me in the morning and said, you want to see me wrestle a steer? He was so cute. He was 7 years old. I said, absolutely, buddy, but they're bringing the cows down, and so but I promise, I'm gonna take your picture. And so at the end of the day, I went and found him, and I said, okay, let's go. And he walked over to this little calf, and he wrestled and wrestled and wrestled. And the calf did not move an inch, just like exactly like this. And this picture was taken when he was done. He was kind of sweaty. And I said to him at that point, well, does your little calf have a name? He goes, yep, his name's Michelangelo. And I thought, now that's really neat, that this little guy out here in the middle of nowhere names his calf for one of the greatest artists who's ever lived. And he said to me, I got some other ones back at the barn named for the other Ninja Turtles. People are funny, and it's so much, the older I get, the more I laugh. And I think it's so important in terms of understanding how to touch people. I watch my own kids, and they're all over the internet, especially my son now, because he's studying filmmaking, and he's so interested, and he is laughing all the time. So I know that things that, that communicate often are things that make us stop and laugh. And I think that's a really important thing to know. That is a really important feeling to elicit in people. I also did a ton of work in the Middle East. And for about 5 years, my kids and I were in the Middle East almost all the time, working on a variety of stories. And this was pivotal for me too, because I came to become very close to Arab women. This is a Bedouin woman, and she was just fabulous. And I learned that so many of my assumptions about Arab women were false. They were funny and smart, and it was gender separate, but they were, they had their own little sorority, and they didn't really want to hang out with the guys. And it was just really important for me to see the reality behind all the junk we hear. Now, this was a Druze wedding, and I got invited to a Druze wedding, and that's a sect of Islam. And I had never been, so I asked a bunch of questions, and they told me, well, the bride will be at her parents' house with all the girls, and the groom will be at his parents' house, and then he'll come with the guys, and they'll start playing music, and somebody, bless them, said, when the bride hears the groom coming, she must cry hysterically. And I said, so she knows, huh? But I was standing right by her, and sure enough, first beat of a drum, she could have won an Oscar. She just started crying hysterically, and you can see Grandma's pleased, and her girlfriends behind are not upset that she's crying. They're hoping she's doing a good enough job. And this is because it's her way of honoring her parents. She's going to be leaving them now and joining his family. And she is honoring them by saying, I don't want to leave. And it's a beautiful tradition in so many ways. And I'd seen her with the groom. They were in love, love, love. I mean, but this was a key and important thing, and it was also a sign of modesty, which is terribly important in her culture. I tried to photograph so many things in the Middle East where permission was tough. And you know what? You guys just never say, don't accept no off the bat. There's so many ways to go around problems, and boy, did I have to do it. This was the last day of Ramadan. It's a Friday prayer. It takes about 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes, I think it is, and you're looking at almost 300,000 Muslims in perfect rows on their prayer mats doing this beautiful prayer. And the only way I could shoot it was from a helicopter really, really high in the air because of all the security concerns. But what I really wanted was the next day I wanted to go with the women, because they go inside the Dome of the Rock and they wait for the sun to rise and they welcome the end of the fast. And it's beautiful. Well, no one's ever done it. So I asked everybody, and everyone, no, you can't possibly do it. So finally I went to the home of the Grand Mufti. And he was busy seeing men, but I heard noise in the kitchen, so I wandered in, and there was his wife and his daughters, and they were cooking and making dinner. So I helped them. I started chopping lettuce and doing, and they were fascinating, wonderful people. And then they invited me to stay for dinner, and I was like, yes. And so I sat down, and he came in, and the boys came in, and we had this very interesting conversation. Their English was so good. It was just fascinating. So I waited till the end of the meal, and I thought, here's my chance. And I turned to him and I said, may I please have your permission to be inside the dome tomorrow when the women welcome the end of the fast? And he said, nope, you can't. And so I went back to my apartment feeling pretty defeated. But about 5 o'clock in the morning, there was a knock at my door, and there was a young woman, and she said, dress modestly and bring one camera. Because the Mufti said no, but his wife said yes. And so this is the first time this has been photographed, and it's like so many things. Once you're in, you're in. I just, knelt down with these women and recorded this beautiful, beautiful tradition in their culture. Eventually, like so many of us, I really wanted, talk about a great job working for National Geographic, but I also wanted to give back. Because I'd been so blessed my whole life, as all of us are. All of us in this room were born under some lucky star that allowed us to be safe and happy and well-fed and successful and educated and everything. And I wanted to pay back a little bit, like so many of us do. And so the first project I did, because I was very interested in the environment was a piece very unusual for me, but I shot this project called Last Stand. I worked with Barbara Kingsolver, and she and I wanted to do an exhibit and a book that talked about how important it is to save that last little 1% of wilderness for future generations. And so I shot it in this kind of old-fashioned way where you shoot it in black and white and then you hand color it. Some of you probably have pictures of grandparents and stuff with little rosy cheeks, and that's what, I just applied that to natural history photography. And you know, the book and the exhibit managed to raise about $250,000 for grassroots land conservation, maybe save a little chunk of prairie, clean up a river, those kinds of things. So it was really exciting for me to realize that my photographs could be useful as well as beautiful. And that, I got hooked on that concept. And I started, after I finished this project, I felt so good about it that I started doing work for aid organizations. So the first place I worked with was Habitat for Humanity, and I did a calendar every year for them on the topic of shelter and what it feels like to have the dignity of shelter. And it became, you know, this chunk of time I would set aside each year just kind of became my favorite time of the year. And it was really making a difference. It was really doing good. So eventually I started working for other aid organizations, and what I was drawn to was women and girls, because I had seen over and over and over again in the countries I'd worked in how we misunderstand poor women and girls, and how courageous and resourceful and smart and funny and hardworking they are if they're just given a little bit of a chance. So I would go around and photograph programs that were empowering women and girls in different parts of the world. And most of it was so uplifting, but it's tough stuff. I work in very, very sad places. But you know, it's for aid organizations that are bringing water and food and education. And then I had one of those horrible days where I felt overwhelmed. And I was taking this picture, and I just was overwhelmed in this refugee camp by how many people were there, what an awful place it was, and how I didn't think I could make a difference. Especially for this little Somali woman who, she was young, and this was her baby, and the baby was sick, and she's in a refugee camp with 70,000 people, and I just thought, what am I doing? What am I mean, haven't we all had those days where I just went, but I did my job, and I took this picture, and 2 years later, I was in a refugee coordinator's office in Richmond, Virginia, and this had been taken out of the calendar and put on the wall. And I saw it, and I said to him, oh, whew, that looks familiar, meaning I took the picture. And he didn't know I took the picture, and he said, oh, yeah, and she's doing great. And I looked at him, and I said, you know her? And he said, oh, yeah, she's working at Kentucky Fried Chicken. Her husband's working at Walmart. You know, baby's fine. And I was like, oh, for Pete's sakes, never give up. Never give up. And I didn't get her out, but this wonderful organization got her out. And what I do is take pictures. So I just decided I would spend the rest of my life trying to take pictures that help people understand how to give back. And it's become, you know, the biggest passion I've ever had, and I've had a few. But you know, if you just teach a woman how to tell if her kids are growing properly, how to provide a little bit better nutrition, she'll do it. You know, if you give her a mosquito netting so that she doesn't have to constantly worry about malaria, it takes such a burden off her mind. If you understand how many people get sick and die from respiratory disease caused by cooking fires, how many people in this room know that 3 times as many people die from cooking fires as die from malaria? And yet we don't know that fact. So, and that's the last one's an example of an unhealthy cook stove. This is a clean cook stove, which changes lives, because guess who's around cooking fires? Women and girls. And education. The numbers on educating girls are just mind-boggling. She will marry an average of 4 years later. She will have 2.2 fewer children. Imagine what that means for the planet. And her kids will get an education. She'll be able to find dignified work, and the world gets a little better. So, you know, that's another topic that we cover. So all of this work is growing now because I started a nonprofit with my incredible girlfriend photographers called Ripple Effect Images. And we cover the programs that are working, that are sustainable, that, you know, empower women and girls in poor countries. And I mean, this team is amazing. We've got 2 Pulitzer Prize winners, a MacArthur Genius, a Emmy Award winner, a National Humanities Award winner. And we're just trying to spread the word and raise awareness and also help these organizations. This woman is the poorest woman I think I've ever met, and she had lost 7 children to malnutrition in India. And an aid organization gave her a little micro loan to start selling food by the side of the road. And at that time, this little girl on the right was an orphan who was wandering literally naked, and this woman took her in and raised enough to start buying goats and breeding goats, and her little girl goes to school now. And when we were about to leave, this little girl came over to me and asked me for my pen and my paper and handed them to her mother, and this is the picture, to show me that she had now taught her mother to read and write. That's the ripple effect. Women in different parts of the world are being taught to be solar engineers. This woman hasn't had a day of education. She runs a solar desalinization plant for her community. Imagine what that has done for her life and the life of all the families in her community. This darling woman is taking her final exam. She's been taught to build solar lanterns. And this is her final exam where they give her a broken one and see if she can fix it. She passed her exam. They sent her back to her village with 50 lanterns, and look at her body language. Look at that body language. She gives all of her girlfriends a bottle of light. These women who've never, ever had light to work by, to be safer, to be able to be industrious, to have the dignity of light beyond the sun coming and rising. We worked with salt workers in India, tough job. And it has to be done during the daytime, and it's usually done by girls. And it takes a terrible toll on their bodies. So they were helping them with that. But at the end of the day, this little girl walked over. I hadn't even seen that she had a solar lantern. And it had been charging all day. And she told me that now she can go to night school. And in this little region, 70,000 kids are going to night school now because of solar lanterns. We forget that women are the farmers of the world. We don't realize that in much of the world, women are the farmers. And if we give them basic veterinary skills, if we teach them crops that are healthier to grow, they will change the world. And also a key thing is marketing. So I love this little story. This is a co-op of women farmers who used to just do all the field work and then someone would come and take their crops. Well, now they bring their crops into the co-op. Other women grade it and sort it and weigh it. Then, here's the farmer on the right. She's finding out how much does it weigh, what's the quality, all of that. Meanwhile, out back is the commodities broker, and she's on a cell phone calling down in the market to find out what's the going cost and underselling it by a couple of cents, and boom, she comes back inside, she sold it all. I mean, it's just so cool. So I'm gonna finish now with just a little story from Pakistan, which is a country I love very dearly, and I especially love the people. And we were in a super duper remote area where we had to go off the road for 4 hours and bounce through the desert to get to these villages. And we got to this one village, and we knew we were going to sleep in the desert that night, but this aid organization had solved their water problem. And so they asked us if we'd like to stay in their village that night. And we said, well, how nice. And with that, they brought out their 2 best cots and their 2 best blankets. And the girls had prepared a soup. And my guide and I were sitting on our cots. And the kids were all sitting with us, watching us drink every bite. And when we finished, it was getting dark. And these people live by the sun, so it was time to sleep. And before we laid down, they asked us if we would like music. And with that, 5 or 6 little men like this came and made a circle around our cots. They had homemade instruments, and they just simply played until we fell asleep. And I have those kinds of experiences a lot. And what it's taught me is that people who have nothing give everything. And they've never heard a National Geographic. They're just being kind to me. And so I just want to spend the rest of my life telling their stories and trying to give back a little bit. Thank you very much.